There's a mysterious interstellar object hurtling towards our solar system, exciting scientists across the globe. From images, we also saw that this object is active, which is an indication that this object is in fact a comet. No one expected James Webb to find anything. 3 Atlas was already strange. A fast-moving object with no water vapor, no coma, and no tail. Just carbon dioxide, dense, unexplained, and far too clean. But then Webb caught a signal, a rhythmic pulse buried deep in the light spectrum. And the closer scientists looked, the more disturbing it became. It wasn't just light. It was structured, timed, and precise. We'll pick out objects that are moving inside of the 4 frames, and we have to identify if they are real or if they are false detections. This isn't a comet. It's massive. It's controlled. And now James Webb has confirmed it's artificial. The Signal Pulse 3 Atlas was discovered on July 1st by the NASA-funded Atlas survey. The official observation date was August 6, 2025, but no official record was ever released. There were no telescope logs, press release, or trace in the public data archives. What happened that day was handled quietly. If the leaked claims are true, then the signal James Webb detected wouldn't have behaved like natural light. It would not be scattered, bent, or reflected the way comet tails normally glow under solar radiation. There was no flare, no visible dust. No sign of water vapor sublimating from a frozen core. Some scientists claimed the light emerged from the center of the object, pulsing outward in clean, even waves. And in those waves, astronomers began to see something that broke protocol. If reports are accurate, they believe it may have followed a pattern. A deliberate sequence of wavelengths repeating at steady intervals. Space just wide enough to avoid overlap, just structured enough to demand attention. Infrared sensors reportedly picked up the pulse first, then mirrored it across secondary instruments, confirming that this wasn't noise and it wasn't reflection. 4 images. This is a brand new near-Earth asteroid. We got one. No. Like I didn't think that was going to happen. We got, yeah. This object, whatever it was, wasn't just glowing. It was emitting. And the broadcast didn't behave like thermal emission from hot rock or gas. It bore the signature of something entirely different. Engineered light. Webb's spectrographic array detected harmonics in the signal higher-order patterns that layered on top of one another like embedded data streams. It mirrored the early attempts of optical communication here on Earth. Laser pulses used in short-range data transmission, low-dispersion photonics, pulse-coded systems designed not for visibility, but for clarity. Clarity that could travel. If this signal was encoded and this emission came not from sunlight but from within the object itself, then who or what was the signal meant for? The size, shape, and path that break the model. We've only discovered less than 40% of the 90% of the object we need to discover. For weeks, the signal was all anyone could talk about quietly behind closed doors with security protocols and internal-only briefings. Because by then, the Webb team had confirmed what astronomers had started whispering. 3 Atlas was massive. It was possibly tens of kilometers across, a scale far beyond any interstellar object previously observed. Oumuamua was barely the length of a football field. Oumuamua is apparently very long and narrow with an axis ratio of about 10:1. Boreas, the second visitor, was roughly 1 kilometer wide. Even the most optimistic models of long-d distance and interstellar fragments never predicted something this large. The math doesn't support it. Statistically, an object that size should never reach us from another star system unless it was ejected by a catastrophic event. And even then, the odds of it entering our solar system are almost impossible. But 3 Atlas flew with purpose. Unlike Oumuamua, which tumbled erratically as it passed the Sun, or Boreas, which followed a high-velocity arc, 3 Atlas glided inward on a path that was too perfect to be dismissed as natural. It entered, not from above or below the solar plane, but directly along it, sliding into the planetary orbital path with uncanny alignment. The probability of that happening by chance is less than 1 in 500, and that's before accounting for what it did next. It didn't slingshot wildly around the Sun like other comets. It didn't drift toward Jupiter or swing past the asteroid belt in a chaotic arc. Some astronomers noted a subtle deceleration near its closest pass. Not enough to be definitive, but enough to raise questions about resistance or control. Astronomers used dozens of Earth-based and orbital telescopes to trace the trajectory, and one pattern kept appearing. 3 Atlas had passed within observational range of every major deep space imaging system. It crossed into view of the James Webb Space Telescope, skirted the field of the Sphere X Observatory, and even reflected against older instruments like TS and WIS, almost like it had plotted a visibility corridor. And every time it was observed, the data came back stranger. That infrared information is giving us so much more detail that we could get with the Hubble in the visible. No tail, coma, or sign of water ice evaporating from heat exposure. Just carbon dioxide, the same CO2 that blanketed the object in the Webb infrared images stretching thousands of kilometers into space. Symmetric and oddly smooth. But the real anomaly was the brightness. 3 Atlas wasn't reflecting sunlight the way it should have. Its glow came from within. Not hot enough to be molten, not chaotic enough to be radioactive, and not decaying like heated rock. And according to spectrographic overlays from Webb, the core of that emission wasn't thermal at all. It was artificial. This term came directly from the leak. One anonymous quote circulating online claimed the emissions resembled photonic structures consistent with engineered modulation, though no official source has verified this phrasing. Meaning the light wasn't just emitted, it was transmitted and possibly encoded. If an object the size of a mountain is capable of transmitting structured light while maintaining a perfectly stable carbon dioxide halo and traveling along an improbable path that intersects every major observatory's line of sight, then the word comet doesn't apply anymore. Neither does asteroid or visitor. Webb's internal logs marked it under a different category. A system, a structured body with consistent internal output, complex external emissions, and no sign of natural degradation. One that moves not with gravity but with intent. And for the first time, there were reports that modeling teams began exploring alternatives, not comet trajectories, but controlled flight paths. Because 3 Atlas wasn't following the physics of a passive traveler. It was following something closer to a flight path. The artificial object theory. It is only the 3rd time we have detected an object that has come from beyond our solar system. At first, no one said it out loud. Even among the internal teams reviewing the Webb data, there was hesitation because the implication was too big to accept. Objects aren't supposed to behave like this. They aren't supposed to align themselves with Earth-based telescopes, and they definitely aren't supposed to transmit structured light signals across multiple spectrums. But 3IA Atlas had done all of that. And when the object's shape, emissions, and trajectory were layered together, a new theory began to form, one that had nothing to do with comets and everything to do with technology. It started with the size. Some early speculative models suggested it could be much larger than any known interstellar object, possibly tens of kilometers. It's functionally impossible under normal models of interstellar debris. To reach our solar system intact, something that large would have to survive ejection from its home system, drift across light years of radiation and cosmic bombardment, and pass through the Oort cloud without disruption. That's a journey so violent it would tear most structures apart. The concept is simple. If a species wanted to travel between stars, it wouldn't build a ship. It would use what space already provides. It would hollow it out, carve a habitat or an instrument or a guidance system into the center. It would line the inner wall with radiation shielding, outfit it with inertial dampeners, cooling systems, long decay reactors, or something better. And then it would coat the exterior in dust and frozen gas to mimic the behavior of a comet. It would make it indistinguishable from nature until someone looked closer. Some theorists reportedly began using the term stealth shell to describe this idea. A passive exterior masking advanced internal systems. A passive exterior designed to hide complexity beneath a natural-looking surface. The perfect disguise, a spacefaring vessel that looks like a rock until it doesn't. And the more researchers stared at the Webb data, the more it began to fit. Because the carbon dioxide emissions from 3 Iota Atlas were more than just a chemical anomaly. They were too clean and too consistent. Natural comets release gas as they heat. Erratic plumes that change over time, often influenced by solar wind and surface spin. But 3 ILAS wasn't doing that. It was emitting carbon dioxide in a uniform halo, almost like a release system. In one of the internal reports, a quiet note was logged which suggested that the gas might not be residual at all. If this theory holds, then 3 I Atlas may not be a natural body at all, but a constructed one. A body that had been designed not by us, but by someone else. Someone or something with a different understanding of space, motion, shielding, and time. Observing this rare comet that had water vapor in it. The shape, the size, the signal, the emissions, and the impossible path. None of it looked like coincidence anymore. Because if someone wanted to send a probe across interstellar space without being detected, this is how they do it. the conscious pattern. By the time the signal had been isolated and its harmonic layers broken into individual bands, a new anomaly began to emerge. It is only the third time we have detected an object that has come from beyond our solar system. It was one that had nothing to do with the object's size, shape, or chemistry, and everything to do with its timing. Hidden beneath the primary frequency were pulses that repeated based on a mathematical structure that scientists across every division recognized immediately. If there were any intelligent pattern in the signal, some theorists suggested it might follow prime numbers, the most universal form of logic. First 2, then 3, then 5, then 7, 11, 13. Each pulse separated by a silence calibrated to match the numerical gap, followed by a brief pause, then a repeat. It was a looped signature built on the simplest, yet most powerful mathematical truth in the universe. That prime numbers are universal and that no matter where you are in space, no matter how alien the biology or technology might be, primes always mean the same thing. They don't occur in nature without reason, and statistically a clean repeating prime number sequence is extremely unlikely to appear in background thermal. This means someone or something inside 3 ILAS was encoding a message in logic, and logic, unlike words, doesn't need translation. As the pattern unfolded, signal analysts noticed something else. Dust being pushed back behind the object by the solar radiation pressure. The pauses between prime number chains weren't even, and the length of those pauses was not just variable, but reactive. This means they changed depending on when the object was observed, and sometimes they shifted following Earth-based signal output. To some, that looked like noise, but to others it looked like behavior. That kind of behavior doesn't belong to a rock, nor does it belong to a comet, and it doesn't belong to any known form of machine built to transmit blindly. It belongs to something that knows it's being watched and, perhaps more disturbingly, something that only speaks when it decides to speak. By the time this realization reached the internal review board, the theory had already started circulating among Webb engineers and orbital analysts that this object, despite its distance and its disguises, might not just be signaling toward Earth, but looking at it, a line of data embedded in the deepest layer of the signal structure, one that didn't correspond to emission frequencies or photon wavelengths or Doppler drift. If you have an object that can adjust its behavior when watched and emit internally powered pulses, then you have something conscious, timely, and extremely calculating. The military panic. When the countdown had been decoded and the signal orientation confirmed, the information had already moved beyond the scientific teams at NASA and the Webb Consortium. The trajectory is very well aligned with the planets, and it will come very closely. It had bypassed the usual layers of public reporting, slipping directly into the hands of Defense Command. This is where the language used to describe anomalies shifts from observational to operational, and where unexplained phenomena are treated with protocol. Within 48 hours of the Webb data leak, before journalists could trace the digital fingerprints, and before astronomers could gather consensus, the object designated 3I Atlas had been quietly reassigned under a new internal classification system, one that did not refer to it as an interstellar visitor or a comet, but as something far more specific and controlled. This reclassification didn't come with a public announcement. It didn't appear in mission logs or briefing schedules, but its effects were immediate. Across the United States, military space command infrastructure, priority access channels were rerouted and observation windows were locked. The goal was simple. Track 3IA Atlas, confirm its path and report any deviation in real time. But the most telling response came from orbit. The United States Department of Defense launched a classified uncrewed military space plane into low Earth orbit. There was no televised launch or press release. A miniature version of the NASA space shuttle, but its mission has been shrouded in mystery. Just a silent trajectory shift recorded by amateur satellite trackers and a set of orbital parameters that raised immediate concern. Some observers wondered if the X-37B's unusual flight path had anything to do with 3 Atlas. But with the mission classified, no connection could be proven. And while the spacecraft's onboard systems remain classified, its behavior suggests one thing clearly. This was not a mission to observe. This was a mission to prepare. Whether that meant intercept, disruption, or simply shadowing, no one outside of military command knew, and no one inside was willing to speak. And yet the message didn't need translation, because when the Department of Defense launches its most advanced autonomous space plane within days of an astronomical leak, aligns it with a distant target, and locks down all open-source tracking data, The silence says more than words ever could. To the public, the official story of 3I Atlas remained unchanged. It's a fast-moving comet, anomalous but not concerning, unique but not unprecedented. Good amount of data, more than 100 observations. We know its trajectory fairly well. But behind the curtain, this object was no longer being treated as a natural event. It was being monitored like an active threat. Command channels began cross-listing it with satellite hazard protocols. Ballistic trajectory software was updated to include hypothetical propulsion events. As if someone expected the object to change course, and somewhere in those conversations, a line was crossed. The scientific anomaly is handed over to military control, and it stops being a mystery to solve and becomes a contingency to prepare for. The biology in the signal. The moment the signal was passed from astronomers to acoustic engineers, and then from engineers to physicists, it was already clear that the structured pulses were filled with data that resisted conventional decoding. They carried an internal architecture far too balanced to be accidental. But it wasn't until the data reached the biophysicists that everything changed. Somewhere within the waveform, researchers began to notice structures that looked oddly familiar. Not to any cosmic pattern or deep space behavior, but to something far closer to home. It was the shape that first raised eyebrows, then the symmetry, then the ratios. At first, it looked like a sequence of folded instructions, patterns within patterns repeating with mirrored delays and perfect pairing. And as those mirrored patterns were laid side by side, a strange reality began to emerge. They were forming genetic logic gates, structures that mimicked the way DNA encodes behavior. Helix-like spirals that unfolded digitally, triplets and codons that matched regulatory sequences seen in eukaryotic cells. And the longer they studied it, the more alarming it became. The sequence didn't just resemble DNA, it resembled ours. And while some of it could be dismissed as mathematical pareidolia, the full reconstruction painted a picture too precise to ignore. The emission was coded, and the code wasn't random. It was familiar. That realization was enough to halt the work. Within days, some labs reportedly received notice from federal oversight. The stated reasons cited interference and spoofing concern, but rumors suggested something deeper. But no one in those rooms believed the origin was terrestrial, and no one outside those rooms ever saw the decoded structure again. But rumors, like signals, tend to spread, and what those rumors suggested was unsettling, even to seasoned researchers. If the genetic structure embedded in the waveform was real, and if it was intentional, then the signal from 3I Atlas wasn't just a message for us. It was a message about us, the mind behind the machine. By now, every scientific explanation had collapsed under the weight of contradiction. The chemistry didn't fit known comet profiles. The trajectory didn't match expected gravitational behavior. The emissions weren't natural. The countdown wasn't coincidental. And the genetic echoes buried inside the signal had shattered whatever remained of the idea that 3I Atlas was inert. But the next theory was worse because it suggested something alive. The idea came from a small coalition of quantum physicists and theoretical engineers working on long-range entanglement models. It's moving at a velocity of about 135,000 km/h, so it's going really fast. They weren't looking for consciousness. They were looking for field behavior, but what they found pointed somewhere far stranger.